interested in how design and how design communicates across different surfaces, so including architecture and products and experience, how they all relate together. So he's the global creative director for KitchenAid Small Appliances, and he is truly connected with everything about that. So packaging and photography and even recipe content, which that's interesting. So before this, he was assistant professor of visual communication at Notre Dame, and his research explores the evolution of typography. And as a typographer, I can say by reading that, I like him more already. So he also worked at Target, and he worked at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and he was a senior graphic designer at Herman Miller. So basically, if you're a graphic designer in Herman Miller, you've achieved like the manna from heaven. So we are eager to hear about all this stuff. And thank you so much for being a part of this, Brian. We're so thrilled to have you spend some time with us today.
All right. Well, that's the high point, really. That introduction. I feel like I should just take questions. I'm going to try to share my screen, and I'm hopeful that you will let me know if you don't see.
Yep, it's good.
All right, so I brought a few kind of case study projects that are sort of messy and encompass a lot of different things about the work that I do. And then I also sort of wanted to cap it off with some personal work that I've been working on and collaborating with some other academic designers and faculty and designers throughout the United States. So I will start with KitchenAid. So if any of you know KitchenAid, and I would suspect, maybe not everybody, this is quite often what people think of when they think of KitchenAid. Really, if you type in KitchenAid, you will get sort of an autocorrect to the stand mixer, because when people think of this brand, they think of that particular machine. KitchenAid celebrated 100 years in 2019, so it's a brand that's been around for a long time. It has a legacy, and it is the only brand within the Whirlpool Corporation of Maytag and Whirlpool and Indesit and Brashtemp. There's all these brands in the house of brands. KitchenAid is the only one that's truly global. So we help sort of people, make stuff all around the world, essentially. And so, this is what a lot of people think KitchenAid is. We have very passionate, diehard fans who love KitchenAid so much that they tattoo it on their body. And this is just a small image search of what you would find if you, looked for KitchenAid tattoos. It's kind of an unusual, unexpected thing that I would never have thought I would, participate in a brand that sort of resonates with people this much. But you can see people feel very passionate about it. And over the last couple years, we've spent a lot of time, since I've been there 3 years now, we've spent a lot of time really refining exactly what KitchenAid is and who it's for. So this is kind of our manifesto, our sort of vision statement. And it basically says that KitchenAid is for people who like to be in the kitchen, even if they don't know a lot about cooking. It's the spirit of cooking and sort of exploration. You don't have to be a sous chef or a professional. It's this idea that you're engaged in making things. And so this is who we aspire to connect with. We're made for makers. This is kind of an interesting time, to be part of a heritage brand like KitchenAid, especially on a global scale, because we're sort of balancing this this position of, reflecting on all of the great heritage and equity that we have, but we're also thinking about what's next. So this is an image that we captured that sort of tries to visualize that dichotomy. We have Yumly, which is a brand, where you can search ingredients and recipes, and it will give you a huge list, a database of all these things that you could cook. We also still participate, obviously, in creating physical artifacts in addition to our product. So, like I said, I started 3 years ago now, and my team is called the KitchenAid Small Design Office. So we focus specifically on the small appliances, the most iconic products for the brand. As an aside, KitchenAid also makes refrigerators and dishwashers and ranges and commercial ranges and a whole other majors side of the business. But I focus specifically on these sort of retail, consumer focused products. So when I started a few years ago, I sort of took over this group called KitchenAid Creative Services, and it was originally designed to basically pull all of the packaging production from a variety of agencies into one internal space. But I was not interested in sort of being a creative service, and was looking at this opportunity to have embedded creative people along with product designers and the UI UX people and researchers sort of think about creativity a little differently and how we could influence design. So that's where the Small Design Office comes in. We do everything, like Shelley said, from photo and art direction of all of our visual assets, global packaging, recipe content. We help with in-store environments. And then we lead sort of special initiatives like limited edition product launches or color of the year, which has become an increasingly big part of our effort. And you'll see on the right here, there's 4 of us. So it's a tiny team with a lot of stuff to do. But the benefit is that, we all kind of get to work on everything, which is exciting to me. So this is a quick overview, of how I describe our team. We make ingredients critical to building connections between KitchenAid brand and enthusiastic makers around the globe. So we're thinkers and makers. We bring marketing strategy to life by generating content and shaping the visual expression of our brand. We leverage our expertise in visual communication and brand systems to build tools that inspire, engage, and inform. And our work is an expression of the quality, durability, and usefulness that's associated with our products. So again, always trying to sort of connect to sort of the bigger business initiatives and frame it in that way so that we get a little more leeway and they trust us to do some more interesting things. So last year was the first year that we actually had a global brand book after 100 years. It's somewhat unusual for brands nowadays not to have kind of a brand book or brand guidelines. I was shocked when I started that this didn't exist. So spent a lot of time engaged with not only research with our consumers, but also different regions around the world to find out how they perceived KitchenAid and how we might better, engage their consumers. And, obviously in North America, we have a huge brand recognition and a lot of the market's basically pretty saturated. But when you think of Germany or China or Australia, brand recognition is much lower, so we have sort of multiple challenges with everybody from people who are very familiar with people who, have never heard of the brand before. We're also kind of a lifestyle brand, and increasingly we focus a lot on sort of situating ourselves within the context of an interiors marketplace. So when people think about redesigning their kitchens or the spaces they live in, we get lots of questions about how do they match paint colors to some of our finishes, or do we have preferred ways of storing some of our products? So it's another example of how embedded the brand is in people's day-to-day experience. And we try to capture imagery that kind of reflects that. So you'll see everything, is in the process of making. There's a sense that people are engaged and sort of hopefully happy, it's not a chore. It's something that they're excited to do, and shows off our product well. Like I mentioned earlier, we are responsible for global recipe, which is something as a graphic designer I did not anticipate would be part of a role that I would have. But it is probably my favorite part of the job because it separates sort of this social engagement with our audience from buying product. So every time we launch a new product or when we see trends happen on social media about whipped coffee or things like that, we have a team of either internal developers or agency partners that help us develop recipes specifically to that, either to highlight certain features that may exist or to acknowledge that people in China don't use a stand mixer, but they use a food processor. So how might you make dumpling dough in that instead of another machine? And then the best part, I think, is this ability to really luxuriate in creating a lot of these beautiful images. And it's a great opportunity to kind of connect with people on a much more human level instead of, always feeling like you're trying to engage people in a sales transaction. So it's really important. It is probably the most feedback I get about my team is how critical this component is, which is rewarding because that means people are coming back to the website or social media or Yumly or some of these places looking for this content, not necessarily feeling like they have to spend more money. So that was kind of a brief overview. I'm going to jump into kind of two particular projects. One is our global packaging, and then another is sort of about the centennial that I mentioned earlier. So I started, and this was our existing packaging system. It was developed in 2013. I actually don't even know who designed it, what the provenance is of sort of this design system. But you can imagine that in 2013, online sales, sort of the global aspect was much different than it is today. And so, this is, although there are people who try very hard and work very hard and are very thoughtful about how this gets applied consistently, there are a lot of issues, that you can imagine from, sort of the evolution of our brand and what people are looking for. We, at the same time, are responsible for being stewards, and we have to figure out when a regional marketing team comes to us and said, we want to include additional product, we want to call it out, and we want all these extra things. We're trying to balance this line of accomplishing what they need, but still maintaining the current system. This is an example of how broken it is, because I would argue that neither of these are good examples, but we're trying to work within sort of the system that exists. So the initiative that we're working on now is really what would the next generation of packaging look like? And we're, sort of exploring it from a lot of different facets that I want to talk about. So those of you who are really sensitive to design and typography will notice that it's kind of a hot mess. All of our packaging has to accommodate between 3 and 5 languages. So that is a challenge. There are legal requirements for countries like Canada that must have French represented at the same scale as every other language. But also we do want to speak directly to people in parts of the world where they're buying the product. So we have multiple languages. There's a weird assortment of justifications, right, left, centered. It's almost entirely all caps, which is super difficult to read, especially on a Black background. And then every day we have marketing colleagues who are coming to us and saying, oh, but I need to add this really great additional thing. Or, there's a competitor that's making a lot of waves with, this feature, and we've had that all along. We just haven't called it out. So how do we add that to the package? So our first goal is sort of setting the landscape for how challenging this is and sort of how broken the existing system is. Another challenge is that these technically are all called a 4.5 quart artisan tilt head stand mixer. but they all require different packaging. And we all need consumers to understand what they're buying when they're buying one red mixer from another red mixer. And it's tremendously confusing. It could be as simple as the trim band, that metal ring that runs around the top of the mixer could have different graphics on it. In Europe, they don't use languages, they use iconography. Sometimes it's as simple as there's a safety warning that is different. And this sort of drastically increases the variety of packaging that we have to accommodate. So right now, this is where we're at. And you know, one of our initial investigations was, how might we take everything that's on the existing box and just simply reformat it? You know, we haven't eliminated anything. We haven't, you know, we're still, all the imagery is the exact same size. We haven't reduced the size of the mixer. It's still, you know, color specific, so people know that this is a silver mixer that they're buying. But just sort of establishing better hierarchy. You know, we're eliminating some sub-branding, which, you know, we've done research and has found that, you know, it's sort of been grandfathered in and it doesn't do a lot for consumers. And so when we think about this sort of redesign, we had to sort of basically evaluate all of the content that's on the box. So this is sort of the categorization of, you know, there are brand specific things that we have to say, there's product specific information, there's features, and then there's very critical legal information that we have to include. And so how do we sort of distill this into something that's user friendly, but doesn't feel overwhelming, especially if it's in 5 languages. So while we're at it, of course, we're interested in sort of thinking about all of the dimensions of the box and all the facets. You know, we have colored product on the front of the current system that lets people know if it's a blue mixer on the outside, it's a blue mixer on the inside. Is there a way that we can be more playful with that? Is there a way we can use a side panel to emphasize that color leadership even more and let people know that there are 39 different colors that they can get instead of just black, white, red, and silver? And then also, you know, things like this that other brands have been doing that give more shelf presence when you see a lot of products, you know, sort of situated next to each other, playful nods to, you know, sort of that interconnected part. So we went to research, and I don't know how popular it will be with some of the people on the call. I'm not a very big proponent of research when it comes to creativity or design, simply because in big organizations, it can be used to sort of distort intentions or, you know, leverage an executive's, you know, personal subjective point of view. So I think, you know, we spend a lot of time very carefully evaluating how we were going to research these things. And so we did qualitative research in person where we could talk to people, you know, establish a baseline of everything is consistent, but then, you know, let them provide us feedback of what they like and what they don't like. You can see here 3 options. They're very similar. They're actually not that drastic at all, but we're trying to gauge, you know, what levers we can pull, how much difference there really is. Like, you know, of course, there was huge concern that making the logo smaller would, you know, make people overlook it, you know, but we all know that when you put that within the context of, yes, but when you float a smaller logo within much more white space, it does have more prominence than if it's shoved in the corner and much bigger. So these were the things that we were looking at. Another aspect that we wanted to investigate a lot was this idea of what the experience was like with the unboxing. And, you know, so you've invested hundreds of dollars in buying a product and you bring it home, do you get really frustrated trying to get it out of the box? And what's your impression of the materials that are, you know, that are included? You know, we have a 25-pound product made of die-cast metal. So there's drop test testing that has to happen with, you know, the styrofoam foam and all of these different things. And yet we're also trying to make a case for, you know, alternatives that are obviously more economic and eco-friendly and user-friendly, you know. So you'll see here, this is just one person that we witnessed trying to simply get the product out of the box. So you have this very tightly packed product that's 25 pounds. There's a vacuum that happens when you open because it's so neatly and exacting in its fitting. So if you're trying to do it by yourself, you're resorted to, sitting on the floor or trying to get it off on a table. We often have a lot of information from people that talk about, how multiple people are needed to get the product out of the box. So it sort of puts a damp rag on this excitement that you had from, finally getting a mixer, having it gifted to you for your wedding registry or, your first apartment or something like this. And then you really struggle with simply getting out of the box and all of the extra stuff that comes with it, from legal forms and registration and warranty and, sort of all of that craziness. So this was incredibly important and, really useful in helping simply our decision makers have some empathy for how our consumers interact with the product and maybe what their impression might be before and after they buy this. So a big learning that we had was simply shifting the orientation of the box made a huge difference because people could either open the top or lift the top off, and the product was displayed nicely. It wasn't as heavy a lift. And, so we had to think about, how are we communicating this? Again, we can't use language because it's, we actually have 19 different languages that they translate into. So we're trying to be really graphic in how we do it. And so this is the result. This was sort of our first test. And it's a limited edition product that we did for our centennial, but it was the perfect test because we could evaluate it on all the metrics of, we knew it wasn't going to be in the marketplace for very long. We could really isolate a particular model and not have to extrapolate what it might cost across all these different products, and then we could, get down to the more interesting part of how do you sequence and pace the graphic design or the information in a way that, keeps people engaged as they're lifting off, the protective foam or, designing places where the use and care guide and the instructions can fit perfectly instead of it just being kind of randomly thrown in the box. Even simple things like having a handle on top, was something that had never been done before. And, it was $1 additional thing, which was a huge additional expense when you ask, sort of the product marketing team. But, you can imagine, the drastic difference it makes when somebody is trying to carry this from Sur La Table or Crate and Barrel to their car and potentially up flights of stairs if they live in an urban area. So we ended up with this kind of result. We have a lot of great data that shows, this improved way of opening boxes and how we can better present and pace the information so it doesn't seem overwhelming and there's a lot of hierarchy. And then we can apply that, sort of across all of the variety of other products that we have, from, little hand blenders to food choppers and all of these various things. So that was kind of a big hurdle that we got to just to simply establish sort of a shift with manufacturing. So I never, you try to consider, these people working on building the product in Ohio and how they put it in a box and, how they put together pallets and inventory it. But to actually go down there and talk to them and listen to, a simple adjustment can make a huge difference for somebody who has kind of a difficult physical job. And then, you're, as a designer, able to sort of tweak something that has huge impact at that sort of operational level. And so now we're thinking about, what are the next steps that we can take? Is it a completely printed, multicolor package, or is it a brown craft box that then has sleeves over it? Because, we don't have to print as many sleeves, as we do packages. There's cost efficiencies, but also obviously huge ecological impact. So these are some of the ideas that we're exploring now, and you can see how. So this is the, sort of just a visualization of our current situation. If you go into Best Buy or Macy's or Target, you more than likely will see some of these products. They may or may not be next to each other, and you can see the inconsistencies that I mentioned about, like, just simply applying branding across all of them is difficult. Type and hierarchies is sort of crazy messed up. You have weird places for features. You have these gimmicky little graphic medallions that say #1 mixer in the world. And these have all been sort of added on over generations. Like, we call it the NASCAR effect, because you just keep adding sponsorship or features to sort of the existing problem. So now we're looking at things like this, where we're giving image a lot more prominence, and we're situating it in somewhat of an abstracted space, so you have a sense of scale, and that the products are relative to one another, so that just by looking at the shelf how big. I mean, you can evaluate this sometimes by the size of the box, but you also get a sense of how large some of the products are. There's a concerted effort, obviously, to play up our color portfolio, because we have a long legacy of being really progressive in the use of color. So that's a big element that we're trying to identify, not only by the photography, but color bars and how we talk about color. This is an example of what it might look like on the side. So instead of just sort of an empty white vacuum with a picture of a product in it, you're situating it in a space where people are making something. Even if it's not a literal kitchen, you can see things in process that allude to how you might use the product. We take advantage of some panels to show really giant, beautiful details of product. And, we summarize everything on the back in a more literal visual way of, like, here's everything that comes in the box. It could be quite a few accessories. It could simply be the mixer and a bowl. And you'll see at the top, highlighting features in a really simple, straightforward way so that people can make comparisons. This is another example. It's maybe more Braun Dieter Rams focused influence, where you can see this clear dissection of the design from image area to information area. So we simply ask the question, what happens if you never put type or information on top of an image? How might you arrange or organize information in a way that educates the consumer on exactly where to look? Like, I know I'm looking in the white area, and I know it's going to be in the lower left-hand corner, and we're making apples to apples comparisons. And you can see how that might extend, across all of the products. We obviously would have to sort of adjust slightly based on the product size. So, these are things we're still working out. Obviously, we would love all of them, to be completely uniform. We know it's not likely. So how do we navigate some of those decisions so that it still holds together as a whole? So you can see here, one of the differences here is we don't have the making on the side where you saw sort of the cake being made and the tilt of the stand mixer head being out, but instead we're promoting other products. We're not trying to, sell an 8-speed hand mixer that's great for 30 batches of cookies. We're simply saying we also make hand mixers, and look at these great colors that also exist that you could mix and match. You could be sort of daring. Some of these products go in a cupboard or a drawer anyway. So we're giving people a little more license to be playful and realize that not everything has to match exactly, which is different than, obviously large appliances. When people are buying a refrigerator, they want it to match their range or their dishwasher. And then we're also we're also exploring ideas where, we're just letting the material be really honest about what it is, and using pattern and line to kind of convey the product that's inside. The benefit of this is we succinctly put all of the information. We reduced it as much as possible and put it on this label. And we can put multiple labels for multiple languages. So that sort of gives us an opportunity to let regions customize which side faces out. It's also reflective of a more direct consumer situation where people are buying all this stuff online anyway. So why not sort of invest in better decisions as far as materials and things like that, and worry less about how big the picture of the product is. So yeah. So that's packaging. I don't know how I'm doing on time.
You're doing fine. You've been, it's 25 of, so you've got loads of time.
Okay. So the next thing that I want to talk about is related somewhat. You'll have seen some references to it, but I mentioned it earlier. 100 years is kind of a big milestone for any company, I would imagine, especially one that's in the consumer world. And so in 2019, KitchenAid celebrated its centennial anniversary. And so the challenges were thinking about how to convey this across the world, across all of these different touch points, trade shows, retail environments, packaging, the website, social media, all of these aspects, and not add to the clutter that is already out there. So we developed kind of this system. We looked at a lot of different options. This is the solution that we came to, which is both. It's sort of a dichotomy of the past and the future, because we wanted to ensure people that, even though we're celebrating 100 years, we're not retroactive. We're not looking back. We're trying very hard to move away from June Cleaver and the meat and potatoes perception that people have about American brands in general, but especially about, appliances. And so we have this sort of dual stripe, and it plays off this idea that all of the small appliances have this metal trim band that goes around them that incorporates knobs, and there are functional elements to it, but it also plays sort of a visual cue when you look at it against competitors. And then we looked at how might we play with this, in a graphic that's not a logo, because we're not replacing the KitchenAid logo, but we want it to be evident to people that this is an important event for the company and the brand, and everything that's associated with this mark is unique and it is very limited, and that after 2019, obviously, we're moving on to other things. So this is sort of the mark that we ended up with. Had to tweak some things to make sure that it read, on all different types of media and surfaces. But we didn't want it just to be kind of this stamp that got placed on everything. So we invented these ways for graphics to interact with the product, in a way that didn't require necessarily all new photography or, a lot of people interacting with it, but tied it all together, and again, we were trying to not exclusively push red, remind people that there are these other colors. So can it demonstrate movement? How can it bring more dynamism to some of these existing assets that we already have, existing photography? So here's some of the examples of what happened. Out of home things, a lot of photography, a lot of recipe development around it. We have a couple KitchenAid owned retail locations, one in London, one in Russia, one in Korea. So because we own those spaces outright, we don't have to negotiate with, a trade partner, and we can really amp up kind of the graphic impression that people have. So this, lower left-hand corner is the London store. And part of that centennial was talking about the past. And so this is a limited edition product called the Model K. And you'll notice that it has a sort of retroactive KitchenAid mark that's reminiscent of one from 1956. We tweaked the typography to not be quite so janky as it was originally, but really leaning into the uniqueness of this, not only the hobnail nature of the material of the bowl, which has direct associations for a lot of people with certain eras, but also unique color, and then how, again, separating this from kind of the other packaging system that we showed earlier. And this is an example where, reducing a lot of the information that's on the other packaging, astonishingly didn't get, a lot of pushback. People sort of recognized that how refreshing it was to have something new. And so we could use this to say, well, we didn't talk about the #1 brand mixer in the world on Model K, so why should we have to do that moving forward? We did a lot of special activations like inserts that talked about sort of legacy and history. Here's a suite of products that was sort of our forward-looking product assortment. So these 6 products in particular, kind of a suite of products, a special color that's very glossy and lickable, product graphics that have teeny tiny little hearts on them. If you get really close, it's tone on tone, so it's not really evident. But again, trying to make sure that this clearly sets itself apart from, what they may see day to day of KitchenAid. This is an example of the store in Russia that I mentioned. So, having the opportunity to kind of play out, what spaces might look like in addition to realizing what it might look like on the website or social media, and of course, brand guidelines. To sort of summarize it, because we're still working with a lot of agency partners, especially in some places around the world, and need to provide some guidance and instruction on how to, replicate this without embarrassing us. So that was sort of really, I felt like I talked really fast to that. Those were the sort of professional KitchenAid references that I brought. Happy to answer questions about those, but I would love to walk through kind of this other initiative that I'm excited about. It's called Ongoing Matter, and like I said, it's a team of right now there's 7 of us, and it's growing to 12 designers. Many of them work in universities, but some of us, have sort of stepped in and out of professional practice. And the goal really is collaborating with very opinionated strangers. And it initiated because of this, so I didn't bother trying to read the Mueller report. It was way too dense and seemed really challenging, but have other colleagues in this team who were really invested in understanding the nuance of all of this, information and then the investigation. And so we just started having this conversation about how difficult it is to get through this. And as graphic designers, how might we approach this information to make it more digestible by people, to increase people's awareness of it, even to get them to read portions of it, because it is really long. But it was downloaded 800 million times, so you can imagine it's out there. I would reason to say that a tiny fraction of those people, as you see here, 3% have read the whole thing. So as a piece of communication design, it's a giant failure. But I don't know that this is specific to the Mueller report. It's probably evident in a lot of government documentation. So our desire was to sort of think about how we might engage people to read it, and the the format that we settled on was posters. And, of course, designers love posters. Everybody wants to make posters. There's a lot of sort of joy in that idea of crafting something really beautiful that can be read at an instant, but also, sort of reveals more as you see it more than once, or, you spend some time with it. And, there's also a connection to this idea of social design work or social work, social messages being conveyed, through very democratic means like posters, that get wheat pasted places or put in kiosks around the world. So this was our goal. And we approached it in a kind of methodical way in breaking up. First, we established the timeline of when these different parts of the investigation happened through these several years, and then we basically divvied it up between the creatives. So you could, if you felt really strongly about a particular point or a topic, you could volunteer for that, or we just split it up. So this is a little detail. So I ended up with the section that had a lot to do with the text communication and the sort of very specific encounter at Trump Tower. And so this is an example of the best case scenario where you have unintrusive text that you can read. Most of the report, for people who haven't seen it, is heavily redacted. So there are huge spaces where you can't read anything, or you might encounter a stray or somebody's name, but no description or context as to what it relates to. So I was looking for ways to kind of think about this in a systemic way and a serial way, and play off that the redactions. Basically, I was more interested in what was being omitted than what was being said in some cases. And I realized that when you could sort of be really specific about that combination, it might intrigue people. So one of our rules was you couldn't add any, you couldn't editorialize, you couldn't add content, you couldn't, make your own statement about what you read, you couldn't summarize anything, you had to use only the content that was in the report. So this is kind of an example of how I sort of went through the steps of, finding a paragraph that had some statements that I was interested in highlighting, but then layering that with other pages in the report that had interesting sort of patterns from the redactions. So as you continue to layer on these other elements, you omit other pieces of information, you unintentionally highlight certain messages that weren't necessarily intended to be highlighted. And it gave you kind of this, gave me kind of this interesting kind of tapestry feel. And I kept it within this, we all had a very specific proportion that we used, but I kept it within the frame of, kind of the layout of the document itself, with the same margins and the US Department of Justice heading at the top. So I ended up really then embellishing and sort of playing up this idea of the redactions, plus, the context of the semantics of where the information was coming from, in this case, texting back and forth, So part of what caught me off guard is how casual some of the language is in this very technical, dense government document, so they have weird nicknames like Fancy Bears, and, you have what do you not spelled out, so this juxtaposition was really interesting to me. And, so there are other opportunities to layer sort of little Easter eggs in there. And so wow, I guess I didn't, oh yeah, I did a triptych basically on these topics. And again, this is all the exact same 16 pages of the document. So sometimes the redactions are repeated on multiple places, but they're different colors. But yeah, so coloring it based on, you know, being heavily influenced by the Soviet situation, sort of a mix of both. The one on the left is, you know, Trump colored because of some of the things that he said. And then now it's been sort of traveling, Indiana University, Cleveland State. It's been locally here where I was trying to think of a way to present these in an exhibition space that didn't basically always paste them just against a wall. So Kreisel Art Center, that's local to where I am, actually is a regional art center that is primarily focused on three-dimensional sculpture. So their collection is public art that's sort of around our region, but they do have a small gallery. And so I took advantage of this sort of idea and situated the posters all kind of in the center of the gallery, as if it's almost a protest of people, you know, and it gave sort of interesting views as people walked around. They could engage it in the round. It wasn't just, you know, sort of a sequence of images or squares on the wall. And yeah, so it continues to be really interesting. I would gladly take names and emails of anybody that's interested in participating, because we continue to get interest, not only for making new generations of work and exhibiting it in new places, but a variety of designers from all different sorts of backgrounds are now interested in contributing. So we have a lot of, I'm translating mine into motion graphic work, and we have people that are, you know, doing interactive screen-based projects based on it. So yeah, that's my pitch for Ongoing Matter. And now I'd love to answer questions from people.
I know Texas is going to have questions, so we're going to start with you, Texas.
Okay.
I have a question. So when you were working with KitchenAid, or are working with KitchenAid, so you're dealing with a product that's obviously got a lot of iconic history behind it. Do you feel like you have, do you feel like you embrace the history, or sometimes have to struggle to move away from it?
It's a good question. It is a challenge. There are people that there's a lot of fear involved with taking something that's so iconic and presenting it in a new way, in a different way. So we spend a lot of time talking about where those boundaries are. You know, I think early on, I showed the pictures of the stand mixer, you know, with paint on it. This was sort of a Skunk Works thing that we did while we had extra time at the photo studio. I ordered a bunch of white mixers and we basically destroyed them, with the idea that, you know, we were trying to talk about the customization, or the ability to add sort of not only colors that are part of KitchenAid, but also, you know, I guess subconsciously to think about how you bring it into your house, into your life. So that's a big part of how we try to keep the brand moving forward and sort of situate it in new places and in new parts of the world, and, you know, demonstrating how it continues to be a useful tool, basically.
And then how do you convey in your imagery equality? Because I heard you say that as part of the value.
So we have a lot of sort of philosophical framework documents that I've developed that establish, like, when we're designing kitchen sets for photography, for example, we have strict criteria in sort of the materials that are used, you know, so don't use inexpensive laminates. We don't use, you know, poor construction or, you know, cheap cabinetry, you know, all of those things that really don't get used, except for being taken pictures of, still convey that sense of quality. And we want our products to be associated with it. I think it's also constantly presenting so food is another big part of the strategy. We try to, when we're thinking about presenting product with food, we try to provide a range, everything from, really simple, straightforward chocolate chip cookies to really elaborate, sort of pastries or, these more where you might level up, if you're learning or you're interested or you're engaged, so that we can continue to speak to people sort of across that spectrum of professionals as well as the novices. So to get back to your question, I think, there are associations that people make with quality in sort of the context that you position things with, or products in. And that's one element. The other is, thankfully, KitchenAid invests a lot in the material design of the products. So, they're all heavy, durable, long lasting, metal, glass, stainless products. So there's a reputation that's been built up and established kind of already based on some of those attributes, which helps even with new products that don't have the iconic sort of reference that the stand mixer does.
Brian, you had said something that was interesting regarding the commercial versus kind of, like selling more products versus realizing food or the idea of cooking. Was that a project manager's kind of influx, or was that something your team evolved?
It's something that my team is really passionate about. I think as creatives, we're knowledgeable enough and we're sort of aware enough to recognize that people make close associations with brands that they have an appreciation for, or there are attributes that they want an association with, and it's not necessarily that every engagement doesn't have to be a purchasing engagement. At the same time, I do work. I have no qualms about the fact that I do work for a corporation that does have very specific business objectives. So it's an extra burden, I think, in some cases, because you do have to be persuasive. You do have to carefully present things so that you're always you're not ignoring the fact that you're making a product to get to consumers, but you're also reinforcing this idea that building a long-term relationship with a brand will yield better results than selling a single product. So whether it's so for example, all of our recipe content that we invest a lot of resources in, we give away for free to our retailers. So Crate and Barrel and Macy's and Saturn in Germany, and like anybody who can rep KitchenAid products, we give all of this content to, with the knowledge that it's another opportunity to kind of demonstrate an interest or an empathy or with people that you're working with.
Mm-hmm.
Daniel, you had a question, or you had your hand up?
Oh, yeah, I had a question. I wanted to ask on the KitchenAid presentation by asking how often do you change or update your star guide? And when you change and implement a new star guide, does it affect sales? Do you have some positive and negative stories to share?
Yes, that's an insightful question. People are very passionate about the brand, not only as consumers, but also as employees. People feel very strongly towards how they contribute and the investment that they make into their job. So changes always are a negotiation, and it is, I guess the approach that we always take is to situate it within an evolution, and not this is bad and now we're on to something new. And I think part of that is obviously working within the the organization that I do, nothing would happen super fast anyway. But even so, we respect, our consumers, our fans enough that we're not going to, do a total 180 and do something different. Although obviously, to your point, we do get complaints from people who feel like even a minor shift seems like too much to bear. An example is we're trying to move away from a certain palette that was developed in the 90s because, trends change, people's associations with color and that influences shift. And, there is sort of a dated quality. Obviously, everyone thinks of or may think of avocado, appliances or brown, refrigerators in the 70s. So we're trying to shift away from that. And there are, especially in different parts of the world, very emotional responses to moving away from a particular color or telling people that, you know what, we have a sub-brand called Artisan. And beneath that, there's been sort of a bad habit of adding things to that name, like Artisan Deluxe, Artisan Design, Artisan, something else. And we're moving away from that because it becomes confusing, and the expectation that people pay attention to that is just not realistic. And people are very emotional about that too. So I would love to say that I can always anticipate what people are going to react to and prepare for it. We do the best we can, but so far the results, have always demonstrated that this movement is healthy for everybody. Like our recognition has grown, our sales have grown, we get increased, engagement from our retail partners and from all the people that we do business with. So that's what I have to use as my barometer, I guess.
I have a quick question for you. You used the phrase skunk work, and I had never heard that before. Could you please explain what skunk work is?
So skunk work is, it's what's the best way to say it? It's an initiative that doesn't have full support and that you're doing kind of on the sly. It's not necessarily that you would get in trouble for doing it, but it is maybe something people would be surprised that you were investing in. So I learned this from Steve Frickham at Herman Miller. He always was passionate about having skunk work projects that were things that he wanted to move forward, that he knew that maybe the marketing team wouldn't be as excited about. So he would set aside some time where he could, play around with something. And sometimes the results were great and sometimes they weren't great. And because you sort of kept it on the down low, the repercussions weren't as dire. So the trick is obviously not wasting a lot of resources that people will get upset about, and then presenting that work in a way that doesn't terrify people. So, we're once or twice a year, I try to set time aside with, some of our photographers in the photo studio and say, how might we play with color more? How might we use backdrops? What would we do if we abstracted the kitchen more and it wasn't, so literal that you saw a sink and cabinets and things like that? It's fun. It's rewarding in that you get to sort of scratch an itch on an idea that you have. I would say it's a 50-50 chance that it gets seen by other people, but it keeps you engaged, I guess. You don't feel like you're always, a cog in the wheel. And thankfully, a lot of organizations are sort of codifying this act, and some like Google are saying, if you work 4 days a week, the fifth day you can spend on, your passion project, or, certain amount of time each month you can dedicate towards, whatever you want. It doesn't have to be billed back to a client. It doesn't have to, result in a business initiative. And I think, that's really helpful.
Wow, excellent. All right, more questions? Feel free to raise your hand or stop talking. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, why not? So you kind of talked about it before. You were talking about your ongoing matter organization, but my question was, since the world is coming a little more opinionated throughout the years, I was curious to see how graphic design would, I guess, evolve or develop to kind of stay with the time, in your opinion.
So, Trish and Donnie have known me for a long time, and my idea of what I was going to focus on professionally is very different now than when I left undergrad school or even grad school. I was really passionate about bookmaking and editorial design, and it didn't take long before I had some experience in that and realized it wasn't necessarily what I thought it was going to be. But also, obviously we've seen this huge shift in how people engage with that sort of, whether it's storytelling or rich media, and that people are watching more video and sort of embedded screen-based things. Obviously, I could not have anticipated that, when I started. What I think the result has been that now my point of view is that if I think about who I'm trying to talk to and all of the opportunities that I have to speak to them, that's more engaging for me, and it's more interesting, and it provides sort of a more broad view of, and a broader experience of how I can design things, whether it's, I mean, overall, I guess you'd say experiences, but I still love designing for print. I can't remember the last time. I guess a couple of years ago, I did some collateral work for a client that got printed, but it's so rare and the context is so different. So, I mean, I do miss that a little, but at the same time, working on video projects, working on motion graphics, working on sort of spaces is really engaging. And I guess I'm confident that as long as I'm designing for another person, I don't have to be afraid about, whether technology is going to take away my job, or, whether I won't be able to focus on this particular aspect of creativity. That was sort of a rambling question. Did I answer? Did I answer your question?
I guess my second part to that is, because you work with so many companies and you've done extremely well in all of them, what is one thing you would tell a upcoming graphic designer to, I guess, hone in on to really boost himself level?
So it broke up a little. I think what I heard you say was, what would you highlight as skills or areas that somebody might focus on that might be relevant regardless of the kind of company you work with? Was that, I'm paraphrasing, yeah. Was that your question? So when I'm looking for people to hire, there are two really important things to me. One is that they're really curious about a lot of things, and it's not just that they've been following Dribble or like these really well-known designers, and they're really interested in what's current, but that they're curious about how they might affect, how their idea might transition something. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they're the most skilled at it, but I think that goes a tremendous way, because inevitably you're always collaborating with other people that will sort of help support sort of that initiation. So curiosity sounds like a cliche, but it's really important. Being able to present an idea clearly. I spend so much time building presentations that I share with people, that I talk about in front of people, and it's sort of walking them through the design process that we've already gone through, so that it's crafted in a way that by the time we get to the result that we want to move forward with, the direction that we're excited about, they sort of understand all of the consideration and the design that we've decisions that we've made. and I think that gets underestimated, how long that takes and how much time it takes to sort of carefully think about how you're presenting work. So those are two areas. I would say the last, as somebody who's worked in big companies as well as had my own business, my own studio, I would encourage people not to be afraid to work in-house someplace. I was afraid of it when I graduated. I thought I had very specific perceptions about working for a giant corporation and how terrible it would be and all of those things. Sometimes it might be like that. I think there's a lot of opportunity to sort of investigate before you take a position, you know, what the environment might be like. I think now, currently, big companies are really interested in engaging with creative people and designers and kind of giving them carte blanche almost to what kind of spaces they want to be in and what kind of, even how you might write your job description, because they recognize how valuable that is. You know, they're not just trying to get more of the same. So that's good news. Obviously, that's not everybody. But also, when you work in-house in a big company, not often, but frequently, you have much bigger budgets. You have mentors or senior people who can help guide you after you've graduated and you're sort of looking for more guidance. And in my experience, you get to do more faster. You know, like the first 5 years I was out of school, my experiences exploded exponentially compared to some of my graduate peers who, you know, had one job and they did web design, you know, and that's all they did for like 5 years. So that's my pitch.
And you're the second person to say curiosity is the most important thing. Just so you know. All right. Any more questions? Anybody?
So I have a question about the future of this series. Brian, this was wonderful. I'm a 1972 graduate from graphic design, so I've been doing a lot of things, and I actually moved into not-for-profit video production. I'm very curious about your motion graphic work, and this is to Shelley and to Don. I don't know how expansive this lecture series is, but it would be really cool to either bring Brian back or have him as part of another group and really get into the motion graphics. I have a desire that the summer program that Don wants to do with typography and with, you know, the actual making of things could be juxtaposed with digital realities and motion graphics. And I think that would be just like a really fun pairing. So I'm curious, Brian, to hear from you about this movement into motion graphics and to explore that area.
Excellent. I think it's really important. I mean, I don't, pretty much everything that my team works on or I work on has a sort of interactive or motion component to it. So even the still imagery that we take, we also capture, you know, just short clips of people either interacting with a product or, you know, revealing a beautiful food or, you know, or it's, you know, we're looking at graphic instruction now of like, instead of this printed guide that you get that talks about how to clean your product and stuff like that, what if it was illustration, you know, that just walked through it. And it would be more conducive to reading on your phone or, you know, a variety of other things beyond, you know, sort of having this physical book there. So it's really important.
All right. Thank you also for your suggestion, Robin. We'll lure you into helping to organize that tomorrow. So, all right. Last chance for any more questions. Brian, is there anything that you wish you would have said that you're now thinking I should have mentioned?
I mean, as soon as I hang up, I'll think about the things. But
it's like
one thing that I thought when you were talking about the pragmatics of in-house, being an in-house design group. The students might not know this as much, and that is all of the fringe benefits of healthcare and of all of the vacation and the a variety of things that, you know, when you're working at a design firm with one or two people, and it's beautiful, it's wonderful, but man, when I was at Upjohn, that, like you said, the budget was there to be able to actually execute some of the dreams, but you had vacation.
Right. Yeah. So even with my own studio, we did a project that sort of advocated for Obamacare when it came out, and we were really excited about sort of that as an option. But then realized as small business owners, it was so unaffordable for us to provide healthcare to all of our employees. So we worked on all these different ways to try to give them stipends or to help, you know, with really critical issues or long-term situations. But it is, you know, every business does it differently until you get to a certain scale, and then you have the sort of reassurance of you know, established, you know, human resources programs that can help you. And yeah, I mean, chances are in-house positions pay a lot more. You can go on vacation without freaking out about, you know, what's going to happen when you get back in the office. You know, naively, you'll still stress about it, but you don't have to worry about, like, you know, getting fired from something or something like that. Yeah, that's a good point.
Plus, you can go on trips to Bali and visually interpret and translate the color.
Exactly. Well, especially too, large organizations, quite often they're global or national. So working with colleagues that aren't local to where you are, you know, also is a huge thing that I think people overlook. Obviously, the people you work with are really, really important, but I learn a tremendous amount from all people that I haven't met in person, but I talk to all the time.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Brian. I truly, truly appreciate it. This was fantastic. And thanks for your honesty and just showing us step by step. Thank you for putting a handle on that KitchenAid box. That's just, that alone, and rethinking about the unboxing. Oh my God. So happy to just hear about the things you're doing, and really happy that other students have a chance to see the different aspects that, yes, typography matters, but how does space affect and how does object, and it really is all the same thing. So really appreciate your honesty and your time, and hopefully you'll be bidding on some of those posters, man. And
yeah, I need the link. I need more about that. So
yeah,
you know.
So Sarah will email the link out. And just one more reminder to all of you all that listening: if you can donate $5 to the fund, Don will repay you $5. That's how much we need. 12 more people in the next 3 days. So and you'll do something on that $5 bill, I'm sure. Yes. So if you have questions, you can ask Don more about the fund, and we have information that Sarah's going to link. Sarah, did you want to put it in the chat, or? Yeah,
I'm having a hard time finding it, actually.
We will email it out. How's that? Is that okay? Or Don, do you have it handy right now?
Let's see, I've got it here, but like, I'm not sure if it's going to be, let's see, I'll take and copy it, and I will put it in a link to Sarah, and then she can put it online. Okay. There we go.
And just to put my final plug in, this is Robin Smith, the Robin Smith who has pledged $1,000 if we make 100 donations. So
yeah.
I really, really believe in this fund, and hope that you'll take Donnie up on his offer to reimburse you the $5. Thanks.
Hi, Robin. That's really wonderful. those of us alums and things from OU. Really
Oh,
great.
I just love the idea of, what this fund is going to underwrite. So big
Yeah.
supporter.
Did you get it, Sarah?
No.
Yeah, I just got it. So I'm going to type it in the chat real quick.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you, Brian. It was wonderful.
Yeah.
And